Hello folks, Guy here again. Welcome to my home on this very cold winter day. Some will claim, well, it's not winter yet officially. Well, try living up in the mountains in the northwest and then tell me that, okay? Anyway, the name of this video is called The Why Guy and History Deniers. You know, I'll be the first one to admit that history oftentimes is written by the victor. So, if that's true, does that mean that we should look at all history through a lens of suspicion? I think that would be wise. However, what if, though, even though in your suspicion, what if there were numerous letters and diaries from those who greatly suffered? You know, along with physical evidence such as films, photographs, you know, buildings, eyewitness testimony, and the rotting bones of the victims? Would that be sufficient evidence to help clear up the suspicion? You know, apparently not. You know, there are a number of U.S. college professors who deny the Jewish Holocaust. They come right out and deny it. And they choose to ignore actual evidence, but they focus in on minor discrepancies to fuel the reason why they feel the event was nothing more than a hoax. So they say, so they claim. But before I go any further, this video is not about what the Nazis did between the years of 1933 and 1945. So why am I bringing this up? Well, my disgust with some college professors is designed to be an allegory depicting something that I feel is as equally important as the death of over 6 million people. How could something be that important? Well, in my 35 plus years of ministry within the Christian church system and by interacting with literally tens of thousands of people over those many years, I have not met even one individual who denies the Holocaust. I never have in all those years. However, there were a few occasions when the subject of the Holocaust, you know, Holocaust denier would enter into the conversation from something maybe we saw on the news or whatever. And we were sitting around, you know, having lunch together. And you know, in those conversations, in every case, the deniers were deemed as unfit to be teaching in our colleges and our universities. You know, the question of why was brought up as well, implied the unifying response was always along the lines of the professors have jumped to a bogus conclusion. This is why they think it's a hoax, because they've come to a bogus conclusion based on peripheral information rather than hard historical evidence. That's the answer that we've come up with, you know, talking together amongst ourselves. You know, the professors, they choose to believe something untrue, and usually for the motive of a defamatory view behind the motives of government. That's usually what it boils down to. You know, and the allegory, in like manner, the professors in Bible colleges, now let's bring up Bible colleges and universities, from all over the world, they have jumped to a bogus conclusion based on peripheral information rather than hard historical evidence. Just like the secular professors have. Because they choose to believe something untrue due to a defamatory view behind the motives of God. How so, you might be asking? Well, take the hell doctrine, for example. You know, history tells us exactly what the Latins did in 440 AD by inserting the word hell, which is infernum, you know, in Latin, into Scripture. You know, by digging just a little bit deeper, folks, one will discover why they did this, which I'm not going to address at this time. You know, you can find this information in detail in my book called In Defense of God's Love. And this is not an infomercial, by the way, for my book, but I just thought I'd bring it out here anyway, okay? If you can see that on the lens. I'll try to remember to leave a link to Amazon where you can get this. But anyway, my point, the word hell was not an error in translation, but it was a deliberate insertion. You know, evidence to this premeditated action was exhibited within Scripture. You can actually see it when Jesus spoke in practical terms within specific verses that addressed the physical, and that key word is physical, status of a person convicted of a capital crime, and what would happen to that body of a criminal within the justice systems of that time. Okay? Gehenna was nothing more than a temporary, and let me emphasize, a temporary physical burning trash heap where bodies of criminals were disposed of. Yet the ancient Latins inserted the word hell to take its place, to take the place of Gehenna, which represented a place of eternal torture for its spiritual, not temporary or physical, but eternal spiritual inhabitants, rather than a provisional place for the physical bodies of the dead. Are you following me? The Church of Rome knew exactly what Gehenna was and what it was used for, yet look what they did. You need more evidence? The word representing a time without end was never used referencing Gehenna in any manuscripts. So how can it be an error in translation if a word representing an eternity never existed within the verse in the first place? Keep following me here. Yet the word eternal was inserted on a number of occasions. You know, and what this did is it made it an eternal fire of hell rather than a practical temporary fire, just like any trash dump commonly uses, you know. So there's no excuse for ignorance. Didn't the ancient Latins burn their trash as well at the time? They most certainly did. They probably still do. You know, Bible college professors have induced pastors over the years who later engender their flock into looking only at the peripheral evidence held within Scripture, rather than hard evidence of history, language, and culture. Okay? In similar fashion, just like those professors who deny the Holocaust. Yet the average Christian would scoff at a Holocaust denier. They're in the same bed, man. In some areas like this, you know, one might ask, how is Christendom basing a belief in hell on only the peripheral evidence held within Scripture? Well, here's the answer. First, by taking Scripture at face value, reading it through the lens of modern Western thinking. You can't do that. Scripture wasn't written in modern Western... Okay, you catch this, right? Second, choosing to ignore the history of what the ancient Church of Rome actually did to Scripture. Just ignoring it. The average Christian totally ignores it or is oblivious to it. Third, embracing the trickle-down teaching from Bible professors who commonly focus in on a half a dozen Scripture verses that have been intentionally perverted to promote an ancient Latin agenda. That goes along with, you know, what happened, what took place in history. Fourth, by not questioning why the Apostle Paul never mentioned hell. Ever. And yet 2/3 of the New Testament was written by him. Don't you think that's important? Then lastly, and fifth, by neglecting over 5 dozen, you know, Scripture verses that claim God will reconcile to himself and save all of creation. You know, I can supply these verses that say this upon request. Just ask me and I'll put it in the comment section. Okay? Now I challenge anyone to ask a Christian if someone believes that the Holocaust never happened, does this make the belief true? Ask a Christian, ask anybody that. Does it make it true just because somebody doesn't believe it happened? You know, most will say no. Yet Christians want us to believe hell is true simply because they believe it is. You know, there's absolutely no evidence they can supply other than a half a dozen Scripture verses that have been intentionally perverted to promote an ancient Latin agenda. You know, referring to those who have a defamatory view about the motives of government, and what it ends up doing is that it's fueling a belief of a Holocaust hoax. Okay? How are they similar to those who believe in hell? See, that's a good question, a valid question. Well, here's the answer. The belief in hell requires a defamatory view of the motives of God. It really does, concluding that God's love for all mankind must be a hoax. Because love would not include something as horrendous as the Latin-based pagan hell. It just doesn't work that way. So interpret God's love as a hoax. How so? In closing this video, God's motive for punishment is for corrective purposes, folks. You know, that's just simply how love operates. There is no action of love. This is the most important part of the video. If you don't get anything else, get this. There is no action of love or for corrective purposes in the existence of hell. You know, you can't dance around it. You can't dance around it at all. Oh, excuse me, sorry about that. So prove me wrong. You know, I challenge anyone. Prove me wrong about this. All right? So why do I feel why it's so important that the information about hell is equally as important as the death of over 6 million people, but happened during the span of, you know, the 6 million people that were killed happened mostly over a span of only 4 years. Because the hell doctrine, folks, has terrorized billions of people covering the span of approximately 2,000 years. Okay? It's got to stop. It's got to stop, folks. And I'll continue to expose the lie about hell with my last breath. If you disagree with me, leave a comment on this video. That's fine. Make sure it's polite. If not, I'll delete it. Look me up on Facebook in a group called the Why Guy Group, if you so choose. It's a private group. You have to answer 3 questions to join, and they're simple, non-threatening questions, okay? I have an avatar name, a fake name, of John Anthony Jones. And on Facebook, you can look me up there. And it's an open timeline, so you can criticize me and be rude as you want, or be as loving as you want. You won't be deleted, no matter what, on that. So I might block you if you're too obnoxious, but anyway, you get my point. Let me see, consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't already, and give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, according to your belief. Okay? Thank you for viewing.